Hello, everyone. I guess we're gonna be able to start. So I am Cécile Dapp. I am the director from LCBI. I'm very happy to have you all here and to be able to present to you the LCBI initiative, its context, the methodology that we have built, and also our next steps. So I'll ask you to put your mics on mute during the presentation, but don't hesitate to ask questions either in the chat or to raise your hand during the presentation. You might, of course, interrupt the webinar. Please note that the session is recorded, so we'll also be sending to you the details of the presentation afterwards. So here is the agenda of the webinar for today. I'll be presenting the LCBI context and the purpose of the initiative. Then we'll have Jocelyn Urvois from Elioth and Kevin Tizi from Artelia presenting the whole work of the technical committee on the LCBI methodology and the certification scheme. So Elioth and Artelia are the co-pilots of LCBI technical committee. Then we'll have Guillaume Odonou from Bureau Veritas presenting the LCBI certification process in Europe. And then we'll also keep some time for the questions and answers. So let's start with LCBI context and purpose while the last people are still getting connected. So for an intro on why we have started LCBI, so as most of you here must know, the real estate and the building sector in Europe accounts for up to 40% of the CO2 equivalent emissions in Europe. And this is when we count the operational carbon of the buildings, so the carbon coming from the energy usage, but also when we count what we know as the embodied carbon of buildings, so the carbon coming from the construction part and the end of life of the building. And as the local energy mix in Europe decarbonize and the energy efficiency of buildings increase, this share, the part of this embodied carbon is going to increase in time. So this is why it's important, it's necessary if we want to drive the building sector decarbonization to account for the whole life cycle of buildings in Europe. But to adopt this whole life carbon approach, to reach this counting of carbon in the entire life cycle, there are still some barriers in Europe. So the first of it being the lack of harmonization of the way we count carbon in Europe. So there is, of course, a solid background of norms defining life cycle analysis. So you must know EN 15804 and so on. But there still are multiple ways of using those norms. So because of this, for the European players, it is still complicated, even sometimes impossible, to compare the carbon footprint of buildings across borders. And because of this, also quite complicated to actually say what a low carbon building is in Europe. And there's a recent Rumble study that has been conducted for the EU that has said that most of the real estate players in Europe also think that it's necessary to have this single way, same way of measuring whole life cycle of buildings across the EU. We also have a lack of transparency in the way we highlight buildings. So in Europe, we have lots of certification schemes. You must know most of them, but most of them are multi-criteria certification scheme that do not give carbon the central place. And when they account for carbon, it's very difficult and complicated to find the carbon result and highlight the carbon result within those certification schemes. So when we talk about carbon and the carbon footprint of buildings, there's still a lack of transparency in the way we account for it today. There's also, we can notice a global lack of awareness in the market. So although this whole life cycle approach has improved a lot and has taken lots of place in Europe now, some players still are still focused on the operational side of things. And some studies, so you can see here that there's this one-click LCA study that have shown, among other studies, that understanding and awareness in the market is necessary to have this whole life cycle approach adoption in Europe. And to finish, according to countries and to regulation, there's still a lack of thresholds, regulations to drive the adoption of whole life cycle approach and to also objectively define decarbonization pathway for real estate. This also has been shown by the same one-click LCA study by a majority of respondents that affirm this regulations is needed to drive this approach. So seeing those issues, we can actually say that, and this is the start of LCBI, the industry in global needs this common methodology, independent from national regulations, to be able to compare whole life carbon values across borders, and also integrating performance thresholds to not only to do the reporting, but also to define a decarbonization pathway and drive the low carbon practices for the industry. So this is how LCBI has started 2 years ago in 2022, led and coordinated by the BBCA nonprofit, and started by those real estate stakeholders that have sponsored and launched the initiative. They have then set up a technical committee co-piloted by Elioth and Artelia, which I mentioned, and BBCA nonprofit, who is the coordinator and the lead of also this initiative. But I'm going to come back to it afterwards. The technical committee of LCBI also counts many contributors and recent members. Among them, you can count one-click LPA, the tool, the carbon accounting tool, Bureau Veritas, and other main European experts on the subject. So as I was explaining, the initiative has been coordinated from the beginning by the BBCA nonprofit. BBCA is a French nonprofit launched in 2015 that has been working from the beginning on this life cycle analysis approach and on defining methodologies and certification schemes to measure carbon footprint of buildings on entire life cycle in France. It has launched certification schemes that have been awarded to more than 600 projects now in France, and has inspired also the French regulation called RE 2020 that has been recently implemented. So to come back on To come back on just quickly, the history of LCBI has been launched in March 2022. The initiative has been a process of a European policy and methodology benchmarking, then a definition of a first version of the methodology that has been published in March last year. Then from then we have gathered lots of feedback on the methodology, and we have been able also to test it on a pilot project. And we have recently published this new version of the methodology and certification scheme in January this year. I would say that this feedback process with more than 50 experts on life cycle analysis in Europe, and especially the testing of the methodology on pilot projects was really key to be able for us to not only have I would say a theoretical methodology that works, but also something that can be used by the real estate players on the ground, and people from all over Europe that were able to tell us that something that works for them. So thank you again to all the contributors to this initiative and the pilot project teams. And so thanks to this process, we have been able to come to something that could be divided in two parts. On one side, the reporting methodology, so the way we account for carbon, that is actually meant to be applicable to any use cases and any building assets. So it could be used in any use cases that you can think of. And on the other side, the application of thresholds and certification schemes that themselves are applicable only to specific use cases, because when we define thresholds, we have to define them for use cases and specific countries. So for this year publication, the certification scheme is applicable to new construction, offices, residential, and hotels. And on those 8 countries, Belgium, France, Italy, Germany, UK, Spain, Luxembourg, and Netherlands. So I'm going to now give the floor to Jocelyn and Kevin that are going to present you in detail the new construction methodology, thresholds, and the way they have been building also this whole work.
Thanks, Cécile. Hi, everyone. So as Cécile said, now we are going to enter a bit more in the methodology, LCBI methodology. So the aim of the LCBI project is to be at crossroads between the actual state of art, as Cécile said, and to give practitioners a way to assess with completeness and evaluation, assessment of the performance, their buildings and their projects. So basically, LCBI is developed on 3 major criteria. The first is known by everyone now, I hope. It's the embodied carbon. We assess all the construction products and technical equipments in a 2D way. We assess with LCA. So we assume that LCA, the more they are complete, the better it is. So you will see after the way to reward it, but the more you assess, the better it is. And also we set 2 targets of performance. The first one is a minimum requirement, and then we go with exemplary on the second one to assess the low carbon performance. The second major criteria is the operational carbon. So all the consumptions, energy consumptions that are used in the buildings and that are estimated or reported. And then we also assess it cross between completeness and low carbon performance. So We are going to see it after that, and also with 2 targets. And the last major criteria is the biogenic carbon stored in the building. So this is an isolated criteria and assessed on low carbon performance. If we can switch to the other side, yeah. So to have a quick overview, those 3 criteria are evaluated, assessed with basically 2 tools. The embodied and the biogenic carbon is assessed with an LCA calculation over 50 years. And as I said, the score reached will be a combination between the completeness and the target reached. And for personal, the energy consumption calculation can be made by calculation on software and or also based on monitored consumptions. So again, we combine performance and completeness, and the consumptions are assessed on a yearly way. So the 3 criteria are combined, and then we assess the number of stars and targets obtained, and then we reach LCBI final rating, beginning with standard, then performance, then excellence. We'll see it after that. A bit elements on the embodied carbon knowledge. So an important element is the reference area. We refer in LCBI to the IPMS2 reference area, which is defined by the standard IPMS without the component H. So it is in the definition of the standard, but you have all the surface that are the areas that are excluded. So it is basically balconies, covered galleries, internal car parking and storage room. Then we assess the embodied carbon on the scope defined with 4 macrolots. It is inspired from levels and also RICS allotments. Again, we have to be at the crossroads and also give LCA practitioner real way to assess based on what the projects give information to them. So those 4 macrolots starts with frame and shell. So if you assess only the LCA on the frame and shell, you reach 1 star. Then if you assess the site and external products of your building, you reach a 2nd star. After that, if you go into your building and you assess the partition and finishes, you reach a 3rd star, which we assume is kind of mainly the way to assess LCA for what we saw actually. And after that, the 4 stars is when you assess the technical and services of your buildings, all the MIPIs. So it is a gap that we can reach now. We can start to reach now. So yeah, with 4 stars, we assume in LCBI that you are the more complete that you can be on LCA. The reference period is as suggested by levels and other countries based on 50 years for a building life period. So the LCA is calculated on that period, and yeah, we do the calculation on EM 15978 principles, which recommend to assess in cradle to grave your LCA. So we can go into a bit deeper into in the next slide. So here you see all the life cycle stages that you can assess for your building, from A1 raw material supply to C4 disposal in end of life stages. And for embodied carbon calculation, we require to have emissions, CO2 emissions on all these stages. So if EPDs are used without emissions on some of these stages, it will have to be completed. For example, if you have EPDs only on A1 to A3, which is cradle to gate EPDs, you will have to complete it, whether with a software, whether with assumptions. So yeah, embedded carbon is calculated on that. As I said before, biogenic carbon storage is an isolated indicator. So all the storage permits with biogenic products will be assessed on this indicator from A stages to C stages. And operational carbon, which is also PREM and Scope 1 and 2 compliance, will be isolated also to get to be the third criteria. Just note that D stages will be reported separately and not accounted in the embedded carbon. And in LCBI, just to be clear, we allow to use EN 15804 plus A1 and plus A2 EPDs. Assume that they are completed on the scope A1 to C4, yeah, fully completed. So now I give the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Cécile. So once the life cycle assessment has been carried out based on those principles that were presented by Kevin, then what has been developed is this 2D reporting framework on which you find vertically the completeness of the assessment. So the lower you are in this table, the more complete you've been able to carry out your LCA. And then on the right, you see the carbon thresholds that have been associated to all those different scopes of assessment. Yeah, based on how complete you've managed to do your LCA, you can position yourself in this table. Basically, we've noted that most of projects are now able in advanced design stages to go as far as the 3rd star, and some of them are starting now to go to a full assessment including on MEP, so reach the 4th star. And a carbon budget has been associated to each of those cumulative scopes, with T1 and T2 being our 2 targets, T1 being the most accessible one, but it has been set as a minimum requirement. And the T2 is meant to be quite challenging, and it's also only those projects that do efforts on all the components that are able to achieve a T2 carbon content of their building. Another important element to note in this reporting framework is the addition of lump sums for those projects that are not able to provide a complete assessment for, and there are always very good reasons for this on projects. Basically, one of the key aims of LCBI is to avoid be in the current situation where a 300 kilograms building in one country cannot be compared to a 700 kilograms building in another country just because the scopes are different. So LCBI reporting should report on the carbon value at the lump sum where the carbon assessment is incomplete, and also report the number of stars that were assessed so that it can be transparently reported how complete the assessment was. So that's the principle. You'll find this principle being repeated also for energy and operational emissions. And I'm going to explain a bit how the thresholds were set, because it's been quite an interesting process as well. So throughout the LCBI project, we've been able to confront those thresholds to some statistical analysis, thanks to some data that was initially provided to us by One Click LCA, and on which we, after some processing to make sure that only those high quality and quite complete life cycle assessment were analyzed. We ended up with a sample of a few hundred projects on which we could assess what the amount of carbon was on each of those cumulative scopes, so frame and shell, site, and then frame and shed added to site and external components, and then partition and finishes. We also have the technical and services, but this is not deemed to be robust enough at this point in terms of quality of the MEP assessment. So yeah, on this statistical analysis, you see a median and mean values. You also see what the top 25% is, and this was quite useful as well to then compare to where we thought the thresholds could be. That's the next slide. Basically, the main principle here, and it's not perfect science, but it's quite a good indication. Was to see that the T1 target was, especially on the third star, so once you go as far as the partition and finishes assessment, the T1 target is quite similar to the top 50% of those LCAs that are deemed to be complete at this point. And the T2 target is quite aligned with something like the top 25%. This was also confronted to some pilot projects, 16 of them, as Cécile said, which were audited and reviewed. Some of those were actually new build projects. Some of them were quite deep renovation as well. The story that those pilot projects told was quite consistent as well with the way that the threshold has been defined. There's been some fine tuning of those thresholds in the last run of the LCBI methodology, but basically we're here and quite happy with this proposal. Maybe one thing I can add here is that in the process of defining those thresholds, we try to address some of the questions that are inevitably raised, whether the threshold should be different from one country to another or from one building usage to another. At this point, the data is not, how to say that, it's not, there's no evidence that those thresholds should be different from one country to another or from one building typology to another. Especially as on the third star scope, which is the most common one. And this is why there's only one set of thresholds at this point, but surely this should be refined as the time goes and as more projects are being benchmarked. This is quite a complex slide, but also something that I'm sure would be of interest to many of you. We've tried to compare how those thresholds position themselves against some other key initiatives, such as the national regulations in France or all the initiatives that are going on in the UK, or the science-based targets. So here you see a sort of representation of the T1 and T2 values on whole life assessment as per LCBI on the right, a sort of projection, indicative projection of what this would mean in terms of upfront carbon. So only stages A1 to A5. This is only indicative, but that's how some other initiatives define their targets, especially the science-based targets in terms of upfront. We see a general alignment. It's not so easy to compare things apples to apples, but overall it seems like that the T1 and T2 targets are based on the same ambitions than some other initiatives, and that's quite reassuring. Now, in terms of operational carbon, there was some work done to be able to define thresholds, but accounting for the very differences that are between countries in terms of content of the carbon content of the electricity and also some other differences that may be expected from one country to another. The first one was to find what how to define the scope of the calculation. We know that the national calculation methodology that should follow the EPBD are meant to be report energy consumptions on 5 main usage, so heating, cooling, ventilation, hot water, and lighting. But that this is only one single part of the one small part, sorry, of the energy consumption, and that some more complete assessment also are quite useful to be made based on dynamic energy simulation or even monitored consumptions for those buildings that have been delivered already. And once this assessment has been done in terms of energy consumption, taking into account the refrigerants and the energy production that may be on site, there's the need to translate it into carbon emissions. For this, we based the analysis on the CREM emission factors, thanks to the very valuable and high quality work that was done by the CREM, and this is the source of data that we chose to be able to define the thresholds. I'll go a bit more detailed and then what was the process for defining those thresholds. So basically, we carried out 2 sets of generic simulations with 2 sets of design parameters. One that would be the base scenario, and one that would be the best scenario in terms of all the assumptions that you make when you carry out an energy simulation. So we did that in 3 cities in each country, just to understand how the energy consumption would vary from one country to another. Some countries need more heating, some countries need more cooling, and overall, we can see that it's actually not so different from one country to another. This was then translated into CO2, that's the next slide, based on the emission factors from the CREM in the 2024 set of emission factors from one country to another. So from there, when we talk about carbon, then there are very significant differences. That's based on the electricity grid from one country to another. And this set of data was then used and compared to some other benchmark that was given to us by the CREM. That's the next slide, where you see here on the left the energy consumption, and on the right the associated emissions. So on those two charts, what you find is on the left, the orange line is the energy pathway set out by the CREM, where you see that there's a sort of flat value after 2035, which is what the CREM expects from the average building stock, and could be quite a good proxy for new buildings. And then you see our base and best scenarios, how they position themselves in terms of energy consumption that was simulated. And this was also useful to help us set thresholds. When you compare it to or translate it into CO2, then you jump to the right on the right-hand side chart. This flat value after 2035 is the orange dotted line on the right, which was our basis for the T1 target on energy consumption. This was quite useful to compare how the base and best scenarios were placing, and basically the T2 target is usually set quite close to our best energy consumption scenario. So this was a generic representation, but the work has been done for every country, and that's how the thresholds were set. I think this is all available in the LCBI methodology, and that's how you end up in the next slide with this rating framework. So the requirement vary from one country to another based on the electricity grid. There were some assumptions made in terms of energy supply, but basically electrification is one of the key assumptions that was made. Yeah, so the more complete you have, the more complete you are, the higher the carbon value eventually. But this is also depending on the country, and you still find your T1 and T2 targets for which we expect projects to assess themselves.
Yes, I'll take the microphone. To continue on the third major criteria, we are now on the biogenic carbon storage. So this isolated indicator has been made in the LCBI methodology in order to align with kind of a consensus across Europe. So the biogenic carbon storage is expressed in kilogram CO2 equivalent per functional unit given by the APD. Also, so you have to, when you do LCA, you report it separately, and this is made in order to value the carbon stored within the building at any point in time of the LCA. So it is neither deducted in A1, A3, nor added in C modules, as it can be in some of the countries or national calculation. So this is the way it is, and this values also alternative sourcing of carbon intensive materials without hiding fossil emissions, because that's what was made with the, for example, the APDs made in 15804 plus A1. We cannot see the biogenic carbon storage. It was summed in the overall emissions of the product. So now we can see how the building participate to the storage of the carbon emissions of the atmosphere. So again, two targets on this indicator. The first one, which is quite accessible to all of the projects, and the second one, which award more the exemplarity of a building without being a full, for example, bio-based building. So yeah, we said it on the panel. On next slide, please. We now go out of the methodology and see what LCBI propose on the whole life carbon rating. So it sets 3 levels: standard, performance, and excellence. And it begins with standard, assuming that, again, we award the completeness and also the low carbon performance. To be standard LCBI, you have to reach 4 stars on embodied and energy operational, which can be reached by a combination of 3 stars on embodied, or only 2 stars on embodied and 2 on operational, if you, for example, do a DES. And you have to reach also 2 target 1 minimum on embodied and operational indicators. So no minimum requirement to reach target 1 biogenic carbon for this first level of LCBI. When you want to reach performance LCBI, you have to reach 5 stars, so unembodied and operational, so a star, a complementary star, and you have to reach 2 target 1 minimum and 1 target 2, whether it is on embodied, operational, or biogenic carbon storage. And when you want to reach the last level of LCBI, which is excellence, you have to reach 6 stars on embodied and operational. So basically, you might have to reach 4 stars on embodied carbon, which is also accounting the technical parts, and 2 stars on operational, or to reach 3 stars on embodied and 3 stars on operational, which means to have to assess, to report monitored consumptions on your building, which is have to be in use. And about low carbon performance, you have to reach 2 target 2 and 1 target 1 minimum. So it is a bit more, to assess exemplary buildings. On next slide, we have an example of the final scorecard you can reach, you can have when you assess your building across LCBI methodology and scheme. So this is an example. You find the 3 major criteria: embodied, operational, biogenic. You have values, first values, for example, 865 kilogram CO2. This is the sum of a calculated emissions, which is 465 that you can see in green, and added with a lump sum, as we said before, in order to complete the assessment on the full scope of your building, in order to report it, for example, in ESG reports and so on. But the targets reached for the embodied carbon is only assessed on the calculated emissions, so on the 400, on the 3 stars, as you can see below. You run an LCA on the 3-star, so you reach 465 value. It reach a target 1, and then we add the lump sum, and it is the value you can report on your ESG reports. The process is the same for the operational carbon values that you can see. The value is for, again, calculated and lump sum. You have, on this example, only a 1-star operational carbon emissions, which is based on the regulatory consumptions, and you reach a T2 because on your country this reach a T2. And for biogenic carbon, you reach a T1 targets because you are on 14 kilogram CO2, which is after and behind the T1. This led to global performance on LCBI level, which is standard because the combination of the stars and the target reach, as said with in the slide below before, is a standard level. And I leave the floor again to Jocelyn.
Yeah, I'll be quite quick on those ones, but it's just to summarize what the story behind the LCBI standard, the performance or excellence rating is. So basically, projects that reach a standard rating are meant to be complete enough to be audited and to reach the minimum criteria that has been set for embodied and operational emissions. Basically, those thresholds are meant to challenge the business as usual and to bring a low carbon design as soon as possible in the design process. And from what we could find, those projects that reach T1 or somewhat aligned with 2035 or beyond energy performance and land within the top 50% of those projects that are today carrying out robust LCAs. The next level is LCBI performance, a bit more challenging. We expect those projects that reach LCBI performance to align with the best practice in terms of completeness of the assessment. At least 1 target 2 must be achieved, and that this means really trying to find the balance between energy performance, site constraints, and efficient and low carbon materials. And this is something that should inform the design process, the project brief, and be quite a thorough work to be carried out so that the performance level can be achieved. And then you've got the excellence, which is really meant to highlight those projects that have been exemplary on all the work they've done. The assessment is meant to be as complete as it can be as of today. It really should be an effort to challenge the design on all types of works and find a very challenging energy performance. so that those projects could land within the top 25% of those projects which have consistently reported their emissions. And basically, this would mean having reduced their carbon emissions by at least 30% over the entire life cycle compared to what we see as business as usual today.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Thank you, Kevin, for this detailed presentation. I can see there is lots of questions on this in the chat. I suggest we'll take them at the end of the presentation or answer it now in the chat. So as next step, we're now going to present you the certification process and also a bit more on LCBI initiative. So as we mentioned earlier, this LCBI, these thresholds that have been defined and the certification scheme that is going to be audited in 8 countries by Bureau Veritas is available for new construction, offices, residential, and hotels. And in those 8 countries that we mentioned, of course, it's the first step of addressing more categories of assets and use cases in Europe, and also more countries. So if you're ever interested in working on one or other subject, of course, feel free to contact us to extend this LCBI certification scheme. I'm now going to give the floor to Guillaume from Bureau Veritas. So Bureau Veritas is the first partner certifying LCBI in 8 countries. And just a quick word on this, having a third-party certifier also ensures a robust data verification, and also ensures that in the end, all the data that we're going to collect from those buildings are compliant, reliable, and that we might be, as I saw a question in the chat on this subject, thanks to Bureau Veritas and third-party certifier, we also might be able to gather anonymously the data and provide the market with some knowledge on whole life carbon of buildings that conduct this LCBI assessment. So I give the floor to you, Guillaume.
Yes, thank you, Cécile. So as a commercial manager at Bureau Veritas, my objective today is to guide you in the process of obtaining the LCBI certification. It all starts with an assessment of the eligibility of your application, conducted by our technical team based on the information you have provided. The eligibility criteria for your information are defined in the certification standard, which is available on the LCBI website if you want to consult it. Once you are considered eligible, you have the opportunity to be audited and to obtain the temporary certificate. A certification that arrives before the construction of the building. After the audit, the auditor generates the audit report and monitors the closure or findings based on your feedback. Finally, the certificate is issued within 10 days following the closing of the findings. In a second phase, after the building has been built, you can obtain the final certificate following the same steps as the temporary certificate, and including the audit reports, closure of the findings, and issue of the certificate. So it's important to note also that you can apply directly for the final certificate if you want. Moreover, there is the option of an operational follow-up audit. It offers a 5 years period to obtain the 4 star in your score, thanks to a follow-up audit of the building's construction for 1 to 5 years after construction, of course. Yes, could you? Yes, thank you. On this illustration, you can see the stages of the procedure with the time indication for each stage. Once your documents have been uploaded to the secure platform, it takes 2 weeks for the Bureau Veritas technical team to examine your file and give you a feedback. Then the remote documents audit and the drafting of the preliminary audit report can take up to 1 month. Then come the results of the audit over 1 to 3 months for the transmission of data and 3 weeks for the closing of the file and the issue of the final report. Finally, allow a maximum of 2 weeks for us to give you an access to your LCBI certificates and your logo. To sum up, the entire certification project from start to finish generally takes between 3 and 5 months. Yes, could you move on to the next slide, please? When it comes to the cost of this process, there are several options available to you, of course. All options are one-off packages. The price doesn't depend on the size or complexity of the project. Firstly, the whole procedure with a temporary certificate and the final certificate costs 16,600 euros for one building, with an additional 1,985 euros for each identical building added to the project. Then we offer the option of just the final audit, the final certificate to at a price of 12,700 euros for one building, with the same 1,985 euros supplement for each identical building thereafter. Both choices can include the option of operational follow-up audit for 1 and 5 years after the construction of the building for 4,000 euros. I should add that we can translate reports and the certificates into the language of your choice at a cost of 1,300 euros. So to make all your requests, make an appointment with our team and receive a commercial offer, click on the link here if it's possible, or send an email to the address you can see on the screen. I think Cecile or another person is also going to share all the information in the conversation. So yes, that concludes my part. I look forward to discuss with you and implementing this certification project in your organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Guillaume. I see there's still lots of questions in the chat on this certification process. So to answer a few questions, so this is a process that have been given by Bureau Veritas, and I saw a question about is that mandatory or not. So as we explained at the beginning, BBCA, that is coordinating the initiative, is a non-profit, and for that, the methodology that we build and we publish are publicly available. So the LCBI methodology that Jocelyn and Kevin presented with the threshold and all the details and even more details than what you've seen is publicly available on our website, and you can, it's freely available to use. But if you want to have the official certificate, then you will have to go through a third-party auditor. This is, in that sense, it's not mandatory. Then to give maybe a wrap up on the LCBI certification scheme and what are its benefits, I would say that for the market in general, it answers the needs that we have seen at the beginning, having a common methodology to speak about whole life carbon across borders and with thresholds in order to be able to set some benchmarks and drive low carbon practices for all real estate stakeholders on the stakeholders. More specifically, on the investor side, it will provide them the ability to access consistent and reliable performance data on whole life cycle carbon footprint of buildings. Those data at asset level, thanks to LCBI, they will be based on the same accounting methodology across borders. So this is actually today something that is missing in order to be able to drive, I would say, investment decision according to whole life cycle carbon footprints. And thanks to this, it will also give them the ability to compare and compute those performance data on carbon footprints at a portfolio level across borders. Then, if you move to project owners and developers, but as it was explained very well, and as we also noticed during the application of LCBI on the pilot phase, LCBI can be used as a low carbon design tool along the entire design and construction process. And for example, during the pilot phase, we also have noticed that some of the projects have changed. Some of the projects that were in the design phase have been able to change some things in order to lower their carbon footprint. Then, of course, the end goal is also to highlight the buildings that have a notably and real low carbon footprint and make them visible, valuable towards the end users of all kinds. So to answer some, I've seen some questions about the next steps and also other categories that we are going to address through LCBI. So maybe I would say to start that building such a methodology has been a huge work, and so a lot of huge process. Yes, now we also have a work of also explaining what we are doing and developing it. But in terms of categories and asset types, in 2024, we are working on the decision to address the logistics asset types and to be confirmed defining a roadmap to address retrofit in 2025. But of course, I would say that in the process, as you have seen, in order to address either a new country or a new asset types or category, what we need is interested stakeholders that have assets and teams that are ready to contribute and test the methodology on their assets. So if you're interested, you can either try the methodology right now on your assets or contact us to define a next development for LCBI. So yes, don't hesitate to contact us. I've seen some question about hospitality and other categories. This could be question we open, but we'll need for every sector a group of interested stakeholders to work on that subject. Then in terms also of where we are going to be in the next month, and if you want to meet us or hear about us in terms of communication, next week we're going to the LCBI team is going to be present as UN Climate and Buildings Forum that's going to happen next week. Sorry, so don't hesitate if some of you are going to be attending this UN forum. Don't hesitate to reach so we can meet. And same thing for the MIPIM the following week. We're going to be there a few days. So if you want to meet, interested in supporting the project and discussing this, reach out to us. Then at the end of the year, at the TIPCA Low Carbon Fair, Salon de l'Immobilier Bas Carbone, we're going to be able to present also the first LCBI certified project. And in terms of certification update, I saw that there was some question about it in the chat, but we are going to be able to develop with one-click LTA, LCBI module within one-click LTA that is going to go out in the second trimester. And kickstart, as I said earlier, work on logistics. So yes, maybe to conclude this webinar and before going to questions, thank you first of all for your listening. And if you are interested, as I said, into whether supporting this initiative, participate in developments or obtain the certification, please don't hesitate to reach out to us or directly to Bureau Veritas for the certification. We still need some contributors to go further into addressing all categories, and also we are a non-profit, so we also need some financial support. It's important for us to develop this important initiative for the real estate industry. So now I would suggest to go out to question and answers. So I'm gonna stop to present my slide, and maybe don't hesitate to either you can raise your hand and ask a question, or we're gonna take the few questions that we haven't been answering in the chat. So yes, Amedeo. No, I can see Amedeo. You had your hand raised, but maybe not anymore. So let me see in the chat. What are the questions? Hello, Eduardo. I see your hand raised.
Yes, hello everyone.
Hello.
Thanks for the presentation and congrats for the initiative, which I think is really interesting. I have a question about the embodied carbon test thresholds. Are they going to evolve in the future according to the decarbonization pathway? So each year is going to be reducing, or is it going to be kept in the same way as it is now?
Yeah, maybe I can answer this one, Cécile. So yeah, this is an interesting question. I guess the LCBI methodology is meant to evolve and adapt as practice and feedback comes from real life. The purpose of setting two thresholds, T1 and T2, was to also give us some time and give a bit of challenge towards the future. At this point, reaching T2 targets on embodied carbon is already quite challenging. But yeah, we could see T3 and T4 values appearing in the next years as efforts emerge and more data becomes available on MEPs and industry decarbonizes. And that's sort of the spirit of the methodology so far.
Thank you, Jocelyn.
Thank you.
Yes, Mark?
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I have a quick question about the operational carbon. Is the commissioning in any way valued by the LCBI?
Yeah, this is a question, an interesting one as well, on how to deal with real life implementation of the energy performance and monitoring. That's why we allowed for 3 different scopes on the operational emissions reporting. Just to explain a bit what the intention was behind the 3 scopes, we know that in many countries only the regulatory consumptions are assessed generally, and not all projects go as far as carrying out a dynamic energy simulation. But still, we also know that this is only half of the emissions or something like that. So dynamic energy simulations are recommended. There's no clear guideline on how to carry out those dynamic energy simulation. We expect it to be a discussion between the client and the consultant to do this assessment as precisely as possible and as close to real life in use conditions as possible. And if the client is then interested in implementing a commissioning strategy to make sure that the assessment that was carried out at design stage is actually being put in place, then this would be a good thing. Then there's also the option
no additional points.
No additional points, but then there's also the possibility to report on actually monitored consumptions, and that's where we expect those projects to compare to what was assessed in the design, put in place some commissioning work if some flows are observed, and go through this process of making sure that the design assessment is as precise as possible and as close to real life, and then when going to real life consumptions, that they align with what was expected at design stage. There's no clear way to audit what a commissioning would be or what a dynamic energy simulation would be. So on that, we sort of rely on best practice on the market at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to maybe we're going to take a few questions in the chat. I can see some technical questions about the reference area. So could you please repeat what's the difference in square meter? So to repeat, what's the reference area of LCBI? Thank you, Kevin. IPMS2 without component H. And I saw just another quick technical question about the classification system for building elements. What is that based on? I don't know.
Yeah.
So
so actually, there are a lot of more details in the methodology on which elements should actually land into the first star or the second star or the third star. This is some work that we've done following the very nice work that was done both by Levels and the rigs in terms of breaking down the life cycle assessment. We could experiment it on pilot projects to make sure it's actually practical for practitioners and that the data is available alongside the design process. So yeah, there's more detail in the methodology on that. In terms of the reference area, there also has been some work done in the refining stage of the pilot projects about that. Eventually, we've selected the IPMS2 definition, which is an international definition of which should be subtracted any external or car parking areas. Which means that the the embodied carbon that is required to build those car parks or external areas should still be included in the calculation, but not in the reference area by which we divide the total emissions. Actually, the thresholds take that into account in terms of setting the T1 target, and there's a sort of allowance for some car parks and balconies, but and also for some works on the foundations, for example, but still meant to be challenging the business as usual, I would say. And that's the definition. So that component H is those external areas that should be excluded from the IPMS2, and that's the reference area selected for LCBI.
Maybe just to complete on this question, we assume that reference area are really different, used in the several regulations across the 8 countries. So we use the IPMS2 reference area to be across all the countries' practices of building practitioners. So this is a reference area that we assume is quite easy to use by all the actors of the sector, and other reference area defined by each country regulation might have specificity that you will be more able to assess to reach your regulations.
Thank you. I see a hand raised here. Maybe Ryan first.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I have a question. I see for the embodied carbon, the calculation is divided in different categories, which you need to add to your calculation. But is there a limit of detail required within these categories? When you know when a category is completely added, or is there, how do you determine when you have all your materials added or not?
Yeah, that's an interesting one as well. So as I said, there's more details on the sub-elements that are required per category. The LCBI reporting sheet is made of a few dozen lines, and actually projects are meant to justify why a line would be left blank if it was the case, so that it can be checked whether it is complete or not. And then the project should also provide the details of the quantities and EPDs associated to that, so that the auditor can check if a result seems noticeably low or high, that the value seems complete. So we didn't go into the details of each sub-element, but that's what's in the reporting sheet in the background and what should be audited eventually.
Okay, and for MEP, for example, because it's not easy for all appliances to find a correct EPD. What if you don't find an EPD for a part in your building? How do you cope with that?
Yeah. So the progressive scope of assessment is meant to align with the current status of data availability, either in the design process, you can't access the MEPs when you're in early stages. Also, in some countries, it's more difficult to go as far as a third or fourth star because of data availability. LCBI acknowledges that, still encourages people to go and find data, and actually this becomes available with some tools that provide generic data, allowed for this data to be relocated, one-click LCA being one of those. And we do acknowledge the current lack of data, but still allow for projects to make a careful selection of data outside of their country, as long as the process that is described in the EPD is close enough to what's being put in place. Hopefully this will evolve, and this is evolving actually quite fast. And this should become possible to make as quite complete assessment in each country. And if as of today data isn't available, then people or projects are able to stop at the second star, for which there shouldn't be too many problems in having a complete assessment at this point.
Okay, thank you very much.
Just maybe to complete about your first question, we also assume, as Justin said, that there is a definition in the methodology of sub-elements, and then elements that need to be components that need to be assessed in each subparts. And we assume also that the LCA practitioner has his intent is to assess all the materials in the building, and also we've worked with the certifier that he knows which kind of materials are awaited for each building part. So yeah, those kind of checks will be made, so it will be more easy to ensure completeness.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I can see a hand raised from Sylvia. Maybe Sylvia. I don't know if I'm pronouncing correctly. Sorry. Okay, maybe Sylvia has disconnected. Then Fabrizio.
Good morning, and thank you for the really good presentation. I think this is a really interesting initiative. I put in a question higher up in the chart, but I appreciate there's a lot of them, so probably skip.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you'd carried out any sort of analysis or kind of overview of what's the main differences between just the methodology, between your methodology, the RICS version 1, the version 2, but also levels, I'm thinking.
Yeah, so this was part of the background work that started 2 years ago on LCBI, doing a thorough benchmark on all methodologies and intentions as well, and try and keep that in mind in developing all the principles. I guess one of the key differences here is that LCBI attempts to provide thresholds where there are ICS and levels are more of a reporting framework at this point. And in that way, some of the slight variations that have appeared in LCBI against those two are because of this need to define thresholds and benchmarks. But generally, I would say that the principles are quite aligned. For example, the fact that the D module is reported separately, the fact that biogenic carbon is meant to be reported separately and can then be either mixed or kept separate. That depends on RICS and levels. The IPMS2 is area is something that is more of a RICS side of things than levels, but we had to make that choice so that it stays practical for people to carry out the LCA. So yeah, there's I guess there's a general compatibility in the process of carrying out an LCA between LCBI and RICS and levels calculation. The final aggregation of indicators may be different, but eventually the work that needs to be done is pretty much the same, and that was really what we try to keep at the core of the LCBI methodology.
Thanks, Jocelyn. Yeah, I did refer only to the methodology itself, not the threshold of course, levels and RICS. Additional quick questions. Is there any idea to look at uncertainty kind of uplift values for the embodied carbon results, for example?
What do you mean by?
So, for example, the version 2 of the RICS standard introduces a calculation that basically asks you to assess it depends on project stage, on the quality, let's say, of your material quantities and on the qualities of your EPDs or lack thereof. And so if you get a low score, you need to uplift your embodied carbon results to take into account, the fact that the LCA is a bit inaccurate, because we know that LCA results have massive variance and things can vary up to plus or minus 20%.
Yeah, well, I guess those principles are really good ones and should maybe applied by practitioners in any reporting framework. LCBI auditing should only appear at the end of design or delivery. So at the point where data is meant to be consolidated enough. And in the earlier stages where people are meant to carry out the assessment to report to their client, then yeah, any principles to make up for uncertainty should be applied. RICS does a good job at defining those, and some other practice may be used in other countries.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see a question in the chat, maybe for Guillaume. Does the certification process include an inspection of the building at the end of the construction? I can answer, but I don't know, Guillaume, if you want to take it, or I can take this question.
You can take it, no problem.
So no, this the certification process actually is wholly, I would say, virtual. So there's no visit of the building in the process. Then I can see a hand raised from Gauthier. Hi.
Yes. Hi. Sorry. Yes. Thank you very much. Could you come back quickly on biogenic carbon, because so I understand that it is accounted separately. So the negative, let's say, negative CO2 isn't taken into account in the A module of the embodied carbon. Mm. And what about the liberated CO2 at the end of life of these biosource materials? Is it taken into account in the C module of the embodied carbon?
No, neither in A and neither in C. So it is really isolated and not deducted from embodied carbon, either in A or C.
Okay, but the biogenic carbon indicator takes into account the A and the C and the module C of the bio-based materials. It's a proper LCA just for the bio-based materials.
It's the amount of, so it's meant to measure the amount of biogenic carbon that is stored within the at any point in time within the product. So this should be given in the EPD.
So the CO2 emitted at the end of life, let's say we burn the wood, isn't taken into account anywhere. Basically,
it is, where? But it's not. I mean, so you remember we have these those three categories.
Yeah.
Embodied, operational, biogenic, and it's just that this biogenic carbon account for potentially stored carbon, but it's neither deducted nor added.
Okay.
It's clear. Am I being clear?
It basically just in terms of more technicalities here, It's the idea behind the new separation between GWP, fossil, biogenic, and land use change in the EN 15804 plus A2. Having the biogenic flow of material, flow of emissions separated is the intent behind this indicator.
Okay. And how did you create the thresholds on the biogenic carbon indicator of a 5 and a 70 or something?
Yeah, so it's, I would say it's experimental or from feedback from projects. The first threshold at 5 kilograms of CO2 is meant to be accessible to most projects and doesn't require any structural timber elements. Working with bio-based materials on finishes or insulation should be enough actually to achieve this one. And it's more of a educative indicator that has been set on T1, and then on T2 it's actually more stringent as a requirement. Those projects with a timber structure wouldn't have any problem in achieving this, but some projects only have a partial timber structure, and this becomes, you know, an intermediate check, I would say. And some projects wouldn't have the any timber structure, but a lot of bio-based materials elsewhere, and you know, should be close enough to this T2 target. That was the way they were defined.
Okay, thank you. And I have a last question for you. For materials that need to be replaced in the service life of the building. Let's say a material has a a reference life of 30 years. Then we will take it into account 2 times, right? We're not doing the pro rata in the LBTI certification scheme.
Yeah, it's the only, you know, full digits, full numbers of replacements that should be accounted for. Yeah.
Okay, can I ask why has this been chosen?
I guess this is to align 2 levels.
Okay.
Yeah, it is. And yeah, just to complete about the philosophy for biogenic carbon isolated and the way to account it. The idea, the intent behind it is also that if you put bio-based material on your project, the LCA is only a theoretical way to assess the life cycle impacts of your building, because maybe it will be more than 50 years. So the bio-based material that you put in it, you do not have to be penalized with the end-of-life burning of it, because it is also only a theoretical end-of-life scenario that maybe someone will keep it in the building, so it will not. So
yeah.
this is a
In
potential
the end,
of the building.
I totally agree with you. I think it's a good way of of doing things. Thank you very much for your responses.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gauthier. Well, I guess I don't see any more questions. So I guess this is it. And if there is any question we haven't been answering in the chat, we'll be answering it directly to you, or you can even contact us for more questions, of course. Thank you very much for your attention, for your many questions in the chat, and your deep interest in the subject. So as you've seen, there are many following work and subjects to address. So you'll see many news from us in the coming months and years. Thank you, Jocelyn, Kevin, Guillaume, for the presentation, and you'll all receive the registering of the webinar from today in the coming weeks. Bye bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll share the
Thank
slide
you
as
very
well.
much.
Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you.